Welcome tonight to our Wisconsin Beef Special Edition, our March 23rd session with Matt Leroux from Cornell University. He'll be discussing profitable meat marketing using the Cornell meat processing tool. With us tonight are your Extension Livestock Program educators, Amanda Kaufman, Bill Halfman, myself, Carolyn Eady, Ryan Steary, and Sandy Stitchin. Please stay muted tonight throughout our presentation to reduce some background noise, and please feel free to add your questions or comments in the chat section. You can find us after tonight's program at our Livestock Topic Hub at livestock.extension.wisc.edu. Feel free to browse around in our topics and events and our news to see that what we have been putting together for you guys. And if you would like to find us later on, you can also locate us in the people section. We hope to see you after tonight's presentation, either online or on the hoof, preferably on the hoof, right? And we will be releasing tonight's video session as soon as it is available. We will work through some editing and add some closed captioning. And please complete the evaluation surveys that Sandy will be emailing you after tonight's presentation, because that allows us to gather really credible information that we can move forward in programming. And like I said before, please find us at livestock.extension.wisc.edu.
Let me go ahead and launch our first poll. So the question that we would like you guys to answer is, what species are you raising for meat sales? It is multiple choice and it is anonymous, so please feel free to select any answer that fits your operation. The second question we have is, what markets do you currently use to sell your meat? Do you use farmers markets, the freezer trade, restaurants and grocery stores, farm stores or sales at your farm, bulk bundles, regional branding programs, or other? And then the third question we have is, how confident are you in your current meat pricing? Are you very confident, somewhat confident, minimally confident, or not confident at all? And we'll give you guys a second to go ahead and select your answers for that. All right, seeing that we have 87%, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. And it looks like the majority of you are selling beef through your meat sales. And the majority is also using the freezer trade. And the majority of you are also somewhat confident in your current meat pricing. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our speaker for the night.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for inviting me out to Wisconsin. I'm based in Ithaca, New York, so I'm really glad to reach out and work with you folks. And I work at Cornell University, and my boss and friend there is a Wisconsin farm boy. So it's great to make this connection for me. I'm going to talk about a way to set prices for meat. I'm going to focus on meat cuts, but I'll say, a couple times during this that the meat pricing tool can also be used to price carcasses. So since the majority of you are selling through the freezer trade, quarters, halves, and wholes, direct to consumer, this tool will still work for you. Frankly, using the tool to price quarters, halves, and wholes is easier, so I'm not going to do a demonstration of that. Just to let you know some of my background and what I do, I'm an extension associate at Cornell University in the College of Ag and Life Sciences. That's a relatively new position for me in 2021. I spent a year out on my own as an ag marketing consultant this past year. And prior to that, I served as a county extension office with Cornell Cooperative Extension, based in the county where Cornell is in Ithaca. So I've got lots of extension experience, and I'm glad to be at the university now. While I was at my extension position, I created the meat price calculator that I'm going to demonstrate tonight. And before all this work, and before coming to Cornell for a master's degree in ag product marketing in the ag school, I worked for two small nonprofits in New England. One was the New England Livestock Alliance, which ran a branded beef program where we purchased grain-finished all-natural beef and sold it through distributors. And we also bought grass-fed, grass-finished beef. And then I also worked for the Heritage Breeds Conservancy in New England. Not the one down in North Carolina, the New England Heritage Breeds Conservancy, where we were promoting the usage of these old genetics and hoping that putting them back to work would start helping improve them as well. And with my role at New England Livestock Alliance, I became an ultrasound technician for beef carcass quality. So I traveled all around the Northeast, ultrasounding cattle to qualify them for our beef brand because we couldn't grade them. We didn't have a USDA grader in New York State. We would grade them using ultrasound data in essence. So that was a great position. It gave me a lot of experience on beef farms. My approach to setting prices begins with looking at the farm's financial goals. And I would encourage you to start to think about, in essence, how much money does the farm expect to get out of the different animals that we raise and market. So if we set financial goals for the farm, annual financial goals for the farm in terms of what we could gross, and if we understand costs, then what we could net as profit, then we can take that goal and begin to spread it across the different enterprises that we have. So I'm just giving a hypothetical example here where we're going to take our $100,000 in sales goal, break it out across two species, beef and pork, in proportions to the way we raise those animals, and then start breaking that down into the number of head that we expect to market. So this is a starting point to understand what our financial goals are and what we hope that the farm can yield for us, and then to work out the expectations for pricing. It's a starting point. So we start to ask ourselves these questions about what do we hope to gross, what do we hope to retain in profit, and we can get down to per head numbers. So a basis, to teach us what's realistic to get out of our farm, and perhaps guide us to the kinds of market channels that we're going to use if we need to achieve certain pricing. And I also wanted to introduce for you the different channels that you can sell meat through. I think we're all familiar with these. I'm going to break them into channels where you sell meat by the carcass, so you're getting paid based on the carcass weight, and then those channels where you sell meat by the cut. They both include a mix of wholesale and direct-to-consumer channels. Wholesale being when you sell the meat to the person who's not going to eat it, they're going to go on and sell it again, like a grocery store, a restaurant, school kitchen, something like that. You do have direct-to-consumer channels that demand meat by the carcass, and that would be the freezer trades. It's a great channel in that respect because it's this sort of a hybrid channel, if you will, where you're not wholesaling, but you are selling by the carcass, and you still get the benefit of going direct to consumer. So freezer trade is a unique channel in that respect. Most other direct to consumer channels wind up being by the cut. When we think about these different channels, we can just sort of sort them out the way I have here. And what I mean by with processing or no processing is the farm responsible for arranging with a processor to sell in this channel? That's what that means. So we have the channels at the very top there in blue where we're selling meat by the cut, where we the farm are going to have to arrange for processing, and that includes selling at farmers markets, selling at our own farm store, selling to grocery stores and restaurants by the cut. And then we have whole carcass channels where, again, we're going to have to arrange for the processing, like with the freezer trade, and maybe restaurants and butcher shops that are going to buy sides from us or wholes or something like that. And then finally, we have those tend to be branded programs and commodity channels where we're selling whole carcasses and we don't have to arrange for the processing at all. So the way I've lined these up is because we can start to think about the price that is possible to receive, the prices that are realistic in these channels. And we tend to think about the prices being highest in those channels where we sell directly to the consumer by the cut. So the farmer's market, I think most of us would expect to find the highest prices received by the farm in the farmer's market. And then on down the line with the lowest price received being in a commodity channel, or even I could have put an auction barn on there maybe. But what I want to get across, and I think I will with the slides that follow, is that the price received does not automatically indicate the profit to the farm, right? Because each of these channels also has a degree of marketing labor required from the farm. And in fact, to receive those high prices and perform well in those direct to consumer or by the cut channels, the farm is going to have to put a lot of marketing effort in, right? reaching consumers, establishing a brand identity, spending time doing sales, delivering the product, or like I said, standing at the farmer's market booth and putting that time in. So there's a different level of marketing required in these channels, and I've ranked them, and it tends to go hand in hand with the price that we receive. So when we have these higher prices, we also have to keep an eye on the fact that we have higher costs. And those costs may come in the value of our time, but of course, that's important for us to measure when we're comparing and evaluating channels. So I'm not, as I've ranked these here, I'm not calling any channel good or bad. I'm just ranking them for the effort we have to put in and the kind of price that we would expect to receive. So the pricing challenge that I tried to address with my approach to pricing and with the pricing tool that I developed at Cooperative Extension is this. It's that each channel, as we just saw, each channel comes with a different set of costs. Largely, we're going to be talking about the value of our time. That's the biggest cost, and it's probably the most variable across channels, although there are other market channel costs for marketing. And then each cut that we have in a carcass, whether we've got sheep, pork, or beef, each cut comes in a certain proportion or yield. And each of those cuts has a certain level of customer demand in the channel. I would actually say that the level of demand for individual cuts varies from channel to channel. Let's say from farmers market sales to restaurant sales, but also we could say from one farmers market to another, right? If you're doing a farmers market in a big city area, you'd probably see different demand levels for certain cuts than you would if you're doing a farmers market in a rural area. So we've got this sort of confusion that comes from the different levels of cost in our different channels, the different proportion or yield of different cuts, and then the level of demand for those cuts in the various channels. Therefore, the solution is to create a unique set of prices for each channel that you use. Now, some people get nervous about coming up with different sets of price sheets, right? But what these price sheets are going to reflect is that we have different costs. And I was giving this presentation to farmers in Pennsylvania, and a couple that markets beef and pork said, well, we do a farmer's market in Pittsburgh, right? Big city. And then that's 2 hours away, but we also do one in our hometown. And they said, well, wouldn't the Pittsburgh customers get upset if they found out that we were using different lower prices in our hometown farmers market? And I said, no, not at all. You can tell them that they're welcome to make the 2-hour drive to save money on beef and pork, right? So you get the idea here. Your costs are different, and your customers aren't going to mind because they don't want to take those costs. In this case, it's obvious. It's that 2-hour drive, or round trip, it's 4 hours. So you can see the merit in having different price sheets. Mind you, if you're doing 2 farmers markets, they're both a half an hour from your home, then I don't advocate for 2 separate price sheets. So, given these conditions that we talked about, and needing a unique set of prices for each channel, that unique set of prices kind of leads people to think that they're going to have different levels of profit in the different channels that we sell in. And I think for ease of decision making and evaluating channel performance, we should just come up with a scenario where we don't have different profit levels. Why would we expect different levels of profit when we market our animals in different market channels? That is usually the kind of way that we think, but we can create a scenario where the profit per head is a fixed value across all channels, and therefore the only variable that's going to influence pricing is the cost of marketing. So let me give you this hypothetical example. Again, these numbers are made up just to illustrate a point. So here we're going to be raising this animal. Let's say it's a beef animal. Our cost of production on an animal is the same whether we're going to sell it in the farmer's market or to restaurants or to customers for quarters and halves, right? So I fixed our cost of production across all channels. Now we're going to take that animal to a processor. For the sake of argument, we're going to use our same processor regardless of what channel we sell it in. So we can fix the cost of processing, based on the carcass weight across all channels as well. Now we've identified our farm income goals and we've fixed a profit per head that we need to make on these animals. So if we keep that fixed across all channels, then the only thing that's going to be left for variable is our marketing cost. And here we're going to estimate the amount of time that's going to take us to sell all the meat from that one animal in these various channels and assign all that time a value. So you can see that in the farmer's market, where I think it's going to take us the most time, we're going to gross more on that animal, but our profit is going to be the same across all channels. In the restaurant sales, I think it's going to take us a lot less time. We're going to have our restaurants placing larger orders. It's going to take us less time to make those sales. So we can cut our market labor cost in half, and therefore we can gross less, but we're still going to profit the same on that animal. And then finally, the freezer trade, maybe we're dealing with some repeat customers who buy from us year after year, even less marketing labor involved, and therefore we can gross less. So when we think about the approach to pricing, I really want to think about preserving the farm's income goals and therefore fixing desired profit across all channels. So the next discussion about pricing is to think about how to break our businesses up. And I don't do a lot of working with folks on cost of production, but it is an important number to understand. So when I ask people, when I work with people on cost of production, I try to get them to break their farm up into multiple businesses. And the same goes for this discussion. So think about your farm at least as being two operations, right? You have a production business and then a marketing and sales business. And the production business, it produces finished slaughter-ready animals. And then it sells those slaughter-ready animals to your marketing and sales business. The price at which you sell those animals to yourself, you should have an idea of what that value is. You calculate your cost of production, look at market value, and then make that decision. You can actually take your farm and break it up into multiple businesses. For anyone who's got breeding herd, that's a business in itself, and it produces feeders. That's its product to sell. So when we think about our decision making in terms of our farm business, there is a market for feeders, whether it's feeder pigs or feeder lambs or feeder beef, and we could sell those feeders out into the market. Likewise, we could buy feeders into our farm. Perhaps we can buy good quality feeders for less than it costs us to produce them. That'd be a good thing to investigate and find out. Then we can run a feeding and finishing operation. Same idea I just discussed. It produces finished slaughter-ready animals. That's where production ends, is when we decide that animal is gonna take that trip. So our marketing and sales business pays a processor to process our meat and then conducts the sales. So as we retain an animal across this chain from birth to freezer, what we're doing, of course, I didn't put it in the diagram, but we're adding value, constantly adding value to that animal. But with that added value comes added cost of feed and care, carrying it through, and therefore an increased risk that we might have a loss. So let me give you an example. If a lamb is born and it dies within 2 days, that's a financial loss for the farm. We had to keep that ewe all year. Now we lost the lamb, right? So that's on the far left of this diagram. But if we retain that lamb and we feed it and we take it to the processor and we pay the processing and trucking bill, and then we have it in a freezer back at the farm, and the freezer goes bad and all the meat spoils, we've got a greater loss, right? So as we retain these animals, we're adding cost and increasing risk, and yes, we're adding value. My point in illustrating this is that there's sort of opportunities along this chain to get out of the system or maybe to buy in cheaper supplies. So if we're going to keep our own animals, we need to justify that with a greater reward, right? We're taking on this risk. We want a great reward. And that I'm going to come back to that idea when we talk about marketing profit. So this is the icon here for the meat pricing tool. You can use it to price meat by the carcass or by the cut. You will need to prepare with data from your farm, and I'll give a list at the end of these slides of the data that you need to gather. But I'm also going to walk through and do a demonstration of the pricing tool, and you'll see the kind of numbers that we're entering. I'm going to give you another illustration because I really like learning with images. So I'm going to give you another illustration of what we're going to be doing with the tool, and then we'll finally jump into a demonstration with it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to accumulate all of the costs and then our profit goals. So what we're going to gather numbers on is our cost of production for that animal. And then our desired production profit, because we want our production business to be profitable, not break even. We're going to have our trucking costs, driving the animal to the processor and then driving back to the processor, in essence, to bring the animal back home as packaged meat. We're going to have our processing costs, and then our cost of our marketing effort, and finally, our marketing profit. And that marketing profit is the sort of big reward that I was alluding to, that logically we should receive if we're going to take these risks. So when we gather all of these costs and profit goals, we gather them together, we have one big number. And then we take that number and we redistribute it across the different pieces of meat that we have to sell. That's basically the logic behind how the pricing tool works. It just takes this and makes it a little simpler to understand. Gather up all those costs, including our profit goals. And now we just have to take these dollars and redistribute them across the cuts. The way that we're going to choose to redistribute them is based on the yield that those cuts come from the carcass. So I tried to show yield with the percentage signs here. We might have a lot of yield on certain cuts like the ground, and then smaller yields on high value, it tends to be high value cuts like steaks and chops. And we have consumer demand for those cuts. So big shopping cart means lots of people want to buy steaks and chops, right? Small shopping carts mean fewer people are interested in buying our roasts and our stew meat and so on. So this is all going through our head as we work on pricing. When I do open up the pricing tool and start to do that demonstration, I'm going to enter some of these numbers, and I want to talk about them now so that we know what I'm talking about when we get there. The break-even cost of production is what it takes for us to get that animal finished and slaughter ready. And then the production profit is what we want to receive for that side of our business. So we're talking about production profit and marketing profit for these two different and unique efforts. So I'm going to use a beef example tonight, and I'm going to say that the break-even cost of production on this beef animal is $1,300 per head. And then I'm going to allocate $100 as the profit per head that I want to receive on my production side. Next, I'm going to look at the cost of marketing. So how much time will I invest in selling? You probably don't have this number available to you today, but as you go through selling animals in the coming months, you could maybe keep a log or start to keep track of how long it takes you to sell all that meat. For the farmer's market, I'm going to estimate it's going to take me 40 hours to sell all the meat from one animal. Of course, it doesn't work that neat and clean where you just start and finish and sell all that meat, but you can estimate based on total sales and what you've been moving. I'm going to estimate it takes me less time than that to sell to restaurants because they place larger orders. Freezer trade customers, again, hopefully they're buying sides and quarters. It take me even less time. And then other channels that I just load animals on trailers for. So we're going to try to estimate our time spent selling. That includes all the effort of selling. And then I'm going to place a value on that time. So I show you a breakout down in the lower left. I'm thinking if I sell 80 pounds of beef per farmer's market, then that's going to take me 5 farmer's markets to sell all the meat from this one animal. If each farmer's market is 6 hours long, and I've got an hour ahead of time to prep and drive over there, and then an hour at the end to pack up and drive home, that's an 8-hour farmer's market for me. If I pay myself $15 an hour, I'm going to say it costs me $600 a head to sell meat through the farmer's market. And now, in addition to that cost, see, getting paid that $600 is not profit to the farm. That's the value of marketing effort. So the profit or the big reward for going through this trouble and going through these activities is to get this extra $500 a head. Now, I made the $500 up. It's not the correct answer for everybody, but I wanted to use that number in my pricing example. All right, so this is the web address for the tool. And right before I get into the demo, I understand we're just going to take a short break for questions. And then when we come back from the break, I'll actually open up the website and start the demo.
So we did have questions come into the chat, and it's 2 very similar questions, so I think we can merge them. Usually the marketplace will give you feedback on your pricing, if too high, if you have undersold meat, price too low and whatnot. So how about pricing according to whatever the market can bear?
Sure, and what that market can bear will come with experience, right? You'll get your customer feedback. Of course, there's, this conventional wisdom that you should always have a certain percentage of the population complaining about your price. It's kind of something that's been handed down to me. But yeah, what we're going to try to do is use the variety of cuts to sort of distribute those costs across all those cuts, and hopefully wind up with sort of a matrix that works for our customers. But yeah, of course, there is a price that the market will bear in each channel. And we'll discuss some of that right at the end of the calculator demonstration.
And then one more question, and I'm trying to think how to word this, but I think it comes to kind of like what profit you should expect. And the other side of that equation is your cost for raising that animal. So is it optimistic to think that we can raise a steer to 1,400 pounds for $1,000, or how do we raise a steer more affordably, market being aside?
Well, so that's a question slightly confusing. It sounds like maybe what they're asking is, if we find that we feel our pricing is too high, what can we address that by trying to cut our cost of production? Is that?
I think that's where they're going. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's very true, and thanks for asking that, because sure, if we set our farm's financial goals, let's say, we might find that they're just unrealistic, or as you say in that example, we might come up with prices that are ultimately not realistic for the market, and so we have to look at, what are the options in front of us? Do we need to find ways to cut costs? Do we need to seek other markets? Or, do we need to revise our profit goals and our expectations for sales? Yeah. That's a good question, and I think that's ultimately how you have to think about it. And I did, I encountered a farm that was, frankly, marketing a very small number of animals, and they did have their prices. I think they had their prices set very well for where they were marketing, and they found that they couldn't make enough money for the farm, just selling a small number of animals at high prices, and that's a tough discussion to have. It's maybe you need to look at cutting some costs. Maybe you need to look at other forms of income from the farm, because you're not going to be able to make a living just selling these 20 head a year. So there's a lot of discussion and a lot of questions to ask about the whole farm operation and its ability to contribute.
Oh, those are good points. Thank you.
All right, so we do have some more poll questions to ask during this little break. All right, so the first question we have is, when selling meat by the cut, which cut do you sell out of first? Do you sell out of steaks, burgers, roasts, others, or I don't sell my meat by individual cuts? The second question we have for you is, when selling meat by the cut, which cut is slowest to sell or ends up being stockpiled? Is it steaks, burgers, roasts, others, or that you don't sell your meat by individual cuts? And we'll give you guys a few seconds to go ahead and answer those questions.
I'm really excited to see the results of this one. Of course, I just took a sip of water and got it down the wrong pipe. So it's interesting to see that burgers, running really strong in cuts that sell quickly, because there are those farms that say that burger is the cut that they find the most difficult to sell, and there are always those who sell out of it very quickly. And that's I'm sure that's got to do with dynamics around the channels that they're using, and perhaps even their pricing.
All right, it looks like we're kind of stalled out at that 80%. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and we'll share the results. So the majority said that they don't sell meat by the individual cut. But as you guys can see there, that people sell a lot of steaks and burgers, And then they tend to stockpile quite a bit of roasts. So with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Matt.
Okay, so I'm gonna just have to switch to my web browser to do the demo. Yeah, so when you arrive at the calculator, and I'll hand out the web address to this at the end, and I kind of sometimes ask, don't try to go and visit the site right now. Let me get through the demo, and I'll share the web address with you at the end. But when you arrive, it gives you some of the material that I've just discussed with you. And what we're going to do is we're going to progress through these dots when we use the tool. So the first question that we're going to answer is, for which market channel are you pricing? So I'm going to do an example where we're pricing for the farmer's market. And then are you creating a price for individual cuts or by hanging weight? And I'll say cuts. So again, I'll mention, I wasn't going to do the demo type for hanging weight, but it is very, comparably it's easy because you don't have to bring all the cuts home and weigh them out to use that pricing tool. It's fairly simple. And then what species are you pricing? So I'm going to check the beef box. And just so folks know, there's nothing different about the programming on the back end, whether it's a beef or a goat or a lamb. It's just kind of like a survey question, if you will. And then you can go on to the next page. So what's nice about the tool is right up here, it's going to remind you what you're working on. You're pricing beef cuts for farmers market. So now we're going to get into entering those costs that we've gathered. So the first question will be, what's your break-even cost of production per head? And as I mentioned in my slides, I'm going to use $1,300. And then I can put in a production profit. Again, think about this going to the production part of our farm because we don't want that to be break-even. I could do it as a percentage of this cost right here, or I can enter a flat goal per head. So that's what I'm going to do for my example is say $100. You can click on this link and visit USDA price reports on beef, pork, and lamb. If you want to, the reason I put that link there is because if you don't have a cost of production calculated, my first piece of advice would be start working on one and reach out to your extension agent for help. Come up with a cost of production that's realistic for your farm. If you're really lacking that, we do know that the average profit per head, let's say on beef in the US through conventional markets is $100 per head. So you could look at current market prices and assume if that profit per head is consistent and use current market price as your cost of production number. I really would rather see people come up with their own number and make it realistic. This $1,300, I got that estimate from a friend who works in extension and raises beef, and it's to reflect, a small farm in New York State finishing beef breeds on grain. It's what he thinks is realistic. Certainly, if you type just $500 in here as your cost of production, you're going to arrive at pricing at the end that seems very reasonable, but it actually is falling really short of your goals. So this first number that you put in it's a very important one, and you should work with extension folks or with your own record keeping and develop a solid cost of production number. So we're going to go on to the next page, and then we're going to talk about trucking and delivery. The reason I included these costs is because they're easy to track. I understand that record keeping is onerous for a lot of people, myself included, and so we're going to keep track of the records that we can and the costs that seem reasonable to keep. So we're going to enter our trucking costs for driving that animal to the processor, and then ultimately for driving back to the processor to pick up the meat, and perhaps any added cost of delivering it to our customers. If you want help with that, you can use the trucking cost helper, and you can just fill out some numbers with these questions. How many head did you truck to the processor? I'm going to say I took a load of 4. And what was your total cost for fuel and any other associated costs? I'll say it was $120. How many hours did you spend? I spent 4 hours driving round trip. And what's a good hourly rate for your time? I think $15 an hour. So that's going to tell me that my cost for trucking one animal was $45. And so I could use that number, but I'm going to stick to my script here and use $35. And then in this farmer's market example, I'm just going to drive back, pick up the meat, and bring it home in my freezers for when I go to market. So I'm going to say it's the same cost per head. to drive back and pick the meat up. And I can just go on to the next page. And then we have our processing costs. Nice thing about these records or these costs is that they're reflected on your invoice from the processor, so they shouldn't be too hard to find. I'm going to choose the hot carcass weight or the hanging weight. This is what you get billed for things like cut and wrap against, so that would usually be on the invoice. And let me say that it's written right here on the site. For this, you should choose one typical, average animal from your herd, and then keep these records, record its carcass weight, and then bring all the meat from just that animal home and weigh it out, everything that you sell from that animal. If you keep a lot of records and you have this for a group, you could take an average from that group and use that number in the calculator. But assuming that most people don't do all this weighing out of cuts, my advice is choose one animal. Don't choose the best one you've ever seen on the farm. Choose one that's very typical and average, and decide just to keep records with this one animal, record the carcass weight, and then record all the cuts received. So next we're going to enter the kill or the slaughter cost that we pay at the processor. And for my example, I'm going to say that's $85 a head. And then the cut and wrap is 85 cents a pound in my example. So of course, don't forget that decimal, because most places are still under $1. Make sure you have that decimal point in your cost. If you do have extra processing done, like having patties made, having sausages, or any smoking done, you can record that here. You're going to want to put the name of the product. So I'm going to say hot dogs, and then what the processor charged you in additional processing charges. So if they charge you 35 cents a pound to make hot dogs, you would put that extra charge. Later on, a few tabs, we're going to be able to record how many pounds were made into hot dogs. But for tonight's example, to keep it simple, I'm just going to say, no, I don't have any additional processing costs. And I'm going to go on to the next page. So now we get to weights and yield. This is where we're going to enter every cut and every piece that we have to sell from that animal, and then the number of pounds that we receive. Fortunately, I've used this tool enough that it remembers my answers from last time, but when you're using it, you'll have to type them out. I didn't want to make you all sit and watch me type because I'm not that fast typer. So I'm going to put in the names of all the cuts. You don't have to use a particular conventional naming. You can name it, whatever you want to name it, regional names or whatever you have for different cuts of meat. And if you have something like lamb and you're selling the pelt, excuse me, you're selling the pelt, you can even put that down in here because that contributes to the total sales volume from the animal. And when you cut to the pounds, just say 1 because you just have 1 pelt to sell. All right, so now I'm going to enter how many pounds I received off the animal. So I'm going to have to just type little pounds in here for each cut. Bear with me a minute while I do that. Your browser, if you do everything in the same order like I'm doing every time you use it, your browser will tend to remember the names of the cuts and save you. If you want to do different pricing schemes, keep a set of notes the way I do, and then just come to the site with your script in hand. All your information is already gathered, and that way you just have to type it in instead of scrambling around to find it. Okay, now I've got all of my cuts entered and the number of pounds that I received from this one animal, or the average from my group. And so I can go on to the next page. But I just mentioned quickly, you can add all the cuts that you need to, so you could make that list long or short as you need to. Okay, so now what we're going to get is a summary of what we've entered so far. From our 605-pound carcass, we have 389 pounds to sell. So our yield from carcass to retail is 64%. That's a fine yield on a beef animal. Our carcass value is our cost of production plus our production profit. If you recall, we have our total on trucking, the slaughter cost, and then the cost of cut and wrap. And have we done additional processed goods, the additional processing costs will be lumped into this cut and wrap. So far, our total cost, if you think about everything we've included so far, our cost for raising the animal, bringing it to the processor, and bringing the packages of meat back to the farm into our freezer is $2,070. We haven't done any selling time yet. We've just done production, trucking, and processing. So now we're going to get into the cost of marketing. So we can allocate our labor cost as a percent of this total cost up here, or in a flat per head number. And for my example, selling at the farmer's market, I'm going to say that 40 hours of time selling at the farmer's market at $15 an hour gives me a marketing cost of $600 per head. And then my desired profit, as I mentioned, that sort of, why are we doing this? Why are we going direct to consumer? Why are we taking on these risks and this extra work of marketing? It's because we want a greater profit per head, or a greater sort of reward for that effort. And now I'm going to make that $500 per head. So now I've basically just added $1,100 to the total cost so far. So now we get on to the next page, and it's asking, what is your current pricing? So if this is a market channel that you currently sell in, then we'd have you put in your current prices, and in essence, the calculator will test to see if they reach your goals and cover your costs. If you're creating a set of prices for the very first time, then you can just enter $1 a pound for all these cuts. And on the next page, of course, it will tell you that those prices are too low, but that's okay. It makes it a simple process just to say $1 a pound for all cuts. So my current pricing that I'm using at this farmer's market, these are hypothetical now. I'm going to enter them. You can see that it's showing how many pounds of each cut we have. Parentheses next to the cut name. Again, gather all, before you visit the site and try to click through, gather your data from your farm, get all these materials and numbers put together on one sheet of paper or one spot. That way, when you sit down, you've got it all with you and you can just buzz through. So now I've entered all of my current prices, and I can go to the next page. And we get another summary. Your current weighted average price, that's everybody's familiar with what a weighted average is. It's $6.75 a pound across all cuts. The total income from all cuts with our current set of prices would be $2,630. That's our total gross sales with our current price scenario. But based on our costs, our yields, the current pricing is short of our goal, again, our stated profit goal, by $538 per head. You remember I set a $500 marketing profit goal. So really this set of prices, it's not that they're totally terrible. They're paying for our time spent at the farmer's market, but they're just not delivering any profit for that effort. So $538 per head short with our current pricing. So on the next page, we can have a chance to revise prices. And the way that works, and really, I kind of think of all these tabs that we've done before this are like the homework. This is the video game. This is the fun page. When you get here, you've got this red light. When you get your pricing to reach the stated goal, you're going to get a green light. So the game, in essence, is to start adjusting prices until you get a green light. And then you know that this pricing structure reaches the farm's goals. So I'm going to start making some price changes. And I'm going to zoom down here, and I'm going to look at my ribeye price and think, wow, ribeye steaks, they sell out quickly. Everybody loves a ribeye. So I'm going to make those more expensive. They're $19 a pound at the grocery stores local to where I live. So certainly I should be selling them for that at the farmer's market. And then my filet, sure, I'm going to raise my filet price way up by $10 a pound to $25 a pound. But look, we are chipping away at how short of our goal we are. It's reduced to $3.58 now. But look, when we raise filet prices by $10 a pound, we only have 6.5 pounds to sell. It's not going to have a big impact on the bottom line, if you will, with these price changes. That's why the poundage is displayed here, because changing prices on cuts that we have more pounds of is going to have a bigger impact. So I'll continue to change prices. Short ribs, they're really popular still. They were kind of the hot cut for a little while there, and then raised them to $6.50. And brisket is always in demand when people want to smoke it or barbecue it. So I'm going to raise that to $8 a pound. And my sirloin steaks could certainly stand to be a little higher. I'll go to $11. And finally, Ground beef, we have at $5 a pound in our old pricing. And if we raise that, since there's 188 pounds, if we raise that to $6.50, we get the green light. So now we're exceeding our goal by $7 a head. That's not really a big deal. We don't need to weasel that down to zero. We can say, okay, now this revised set of prices, this works for the farm. But this isn't where you stop adjusting prices. What you do when you get a green light is you start to think about what are the cuts that I'm always stockpiling and I'm always keeping in my freezer, right? Maybe it's the chuck roast down here. Maybe it's the rump roast. All right, maybe these are very slow moving cuts for me in this channel particularly. And then what are the cuts that I tend to sell out of? Maybe I'm always selling out of grilling cuts, steaks. So is there room to increase ribeye, sirloin steak price, strip steak price, filet, right? If I can raise some of these prices, in essence, what I want to do is use price to slow down consumer demand and make my pricing work as an inventory management tool so that hopefully I can use price to adjust the speed at which cuts sell to more closely match their yield on the carcass, right? So I have some room here to take low yield, high demand cuts and make them more expensive, in essence, so that fewer customers will buy them or that they'll buy them at a lower speed or lower rate. And then take my slow moving cuts and maybe discount them while still keeping a green light so that they begin to sell faster. And I know that people feel nervous, people selling to their beloved customers start to get nervous about raising prices. But think of this, if you raise your price on the ribeye steak and your customer, they come out to the farmer's market or they come out to the farm with this idea that they're going to pick up some ribeyes, and they arrive and they find that your prices are higher than they expected or than they remember. That doesn't mean that you've lost that customer. That means that you have an opportunity to direct them sort of down Carcass and say, well, look, we have these sirloin steaks. They're less. You're going to try to use those customers to help you with your inventory management. So sell them on some other cuts that you have to offer. The other thing I'll say on this spot is, if there are cuts that just never ever sell, stop bringing them back from the processor. It's time to find a different way to have those parts cut and maybe even to turn them in the ground. As we saw, a lot of people can sell out of ground very quickly. So yeah, use this page. This is kind of the magic page on the pricing tool to think about consumer demand, think about yields, which you can see there in the poundage display, and start working with prices so that you can get your customers to move down into other cuts and help you move your inventory. And I think that's sort of the cleverness of using this tool. So now we've revised our prices and we have a green light. We're going to go to the next page where we get our new summary. It's going to tell us that we've increased our weighted average price across all cuts from $6.75 up to $8.16. That when we sell all the meat from this animal at the current pricing, we're going to gross $3,176. And that while we used to be falling short of our goal, now we're exceeding our goal. So that's good news. You can continue to click through the tool, take a short survey, give us some information here. And if you do enter your email address, then you have the opportunity to have it email you with the values and with the final prices. And you can even get a price list as a PDF file that you can save, and it will tell you the date that you last worked on it, what channel you were setting prices for, and what your new price list is. So you could print that out and save it, or if you have an honor system freezer in the barn, you can pin this price list up in the barn. So that is how the tool works, and I just have a few more slides in conclusion, then we'll take some questions. So there's the web address, calculator.meatsuite.com. I also have it at the end of my presentation. What's the point in working on pricing in this fashion? It's to test and adjust the market channels that you use. Make sure that they're delivering the profit goals that the farm has. It's a way to account for your labor and your costs, and to, as we discussed, manage the inventory of cuts so that we don't have this problem of selling out of some cuts very quickly, stockpiling others. It's a way to evaluate and set prices for new opportunities. Let's say a restaurant approaches you and says, "Hey, we'd love to get some local beef on the menu at our restaurant. What do your prices have to look like?" You can do some estimation, talk with the restaurant, and run through the tool to set a set of prices for a restaurant. It's also a way to help your wholesale buyers. If that restaurant wanted to buy sides from you, you could actually equip them with your weights of your different cuts that you'd get out of a side and have them walk through the tool, right? Their cost of production is what they pay you for that animal. And they could actually see how to sort of collect all their costs that they're going to have when they buy a side, and then how they can redistribute them across the different pieces. Ultimately, it's to develop channel-specific pricing that works for you. And what does it mean if you develop your prices and you get to the end of this price tool and you got your green light and you look at those prices and you say, my customers would never pay those prices. I had a good friend who works in extension, watch me do this presentation. And then he said, that's great, Matt, but I could never get those kinds of prices. Now, he sells freezer beef. And I said to him, yeah, I agree. You could never get those prices because your total marketing effort is a sticker with the farm name on the door of your pickup truck. That's your entire marketing program. So I don't think that you could get these prices. And what I'm saying here is that you may have chosen the wrong channel. You may be in the wrong farmer's market or approaching the wrong restaurant if they won't look at your prices or they don't like them. But also you may need to increase your marketing effort. And we showed that right in some of those first couple of slides. It takes marketing effort in order to receive the prices that we need in these various channels. So think about that. Think about restaurants. If a restaurant doesn't recognize the value of your product, you're not trying to sell to the correct restaurant, right? There are restaurants out there that will pay for farm to table that recognize the value. So it's just a question of, am I marketing in the right places and am I using the right amount of effort? To further address that, I'm going to talk about something that I think we're all familiar with. I did a 6-year research project at Cornell where we captured 13 different traits for every lot of feeder calves that were sold at auction, like I said, for 6 years. And when we did a statistical analysis on that project, we found what traits were contributing ultimately to the final price of any given lot of calves. So I think we all know what we observed there. We found that the lots that received higher prices for feeder calves had good bull genetics, where the auctioneer would announce what the genetics were. They had a good body condition score. Those calves looked good in the ring. That bulls had been castrated, like actually weaned, not weaned on the truck ride to the auction, but actually weaned in advance and started on feed, and that the calves had been vaccinated and boosted. Again, not vaccinated the night before, but actually vaccinated and boosted. So when buyers saw these traits, they paid more for those calves. We could collect these traits and say that they represent applied production management, right? Good managers get all this kind of stuff done and receive the highest prices at the sale barn. So now let's think about what's the difference between $4 a pound ground beef at the farmer's market and $8 a pound ground beef. Well, it comes down to a list of similar factors. Understanding your target market, who are the people that value my product, having a marketing strategy and conducting some research, that is to understand our customers, to find the people who are pulling our product into the marketplace, who are demanding our product, to set a marketing budget, be willing to spend time and money on our marketing effort to reach our customers in this channel, to have effective consumer communication, and to spend time on marketing. Collectively, we could call these things applied marketing management. Really, we need to support our pricing with our marketing effort. It is doable. It can be done within reason. Consumers that buy local meat do not buy it based on price alone. You do need to understand your customer and your customer's needs, their motivations that drive their purchasing, their desires, sort of the extras that they're looking for in a product, and their buying habits. And by understanding these things, you can focus your marketing decisions and your activities to cater to that customer and communicate with them effectively. So this is called, marketing effort, marketing strategy that's applied to support the pricing structure that we need to receive in these channels. When it comes to record keeping, when it comes to thinking about your cost of production and your set of prices, it can be overwhelming, but think about starting somewhere and then improving your record keeping system and your methods each year. What old ag economists like to say is that you can't improve what you don't measure. And I think of it in a positive light and say, you can improve what you do measure. So start recording some of these things, keep records, and you can always improve from there. Snapshot record keeping, such as my example with pricing, where instead of trying to keep all of the records on all of the animals that get processed, right? I'm going to choose one typical average animal, keep records on that one, and then trust that it represents the herd. And I don't have to do record keeping on everybody if I don't think I'm going to follow through with that. To successfully use the pricing tool, you need to prepare yourself in advance. Set aside some time to sit down where you won't be interrupted and click through all those pages and enter your data. Calculate a cost of production that's realistic and really represents the cost on your farm. Decide on your production profit per head, and then estimate the amount of time you'll spend marketing. Decide on your marketing profit per head, sort of what's the reason I'm going through these channels and going through this extra effort, what's the reward. Come up with one head of data, which includes carcass weight and then the weight of all the cuts received back. Have your processor invoice so you know what you paid for slaughter and cut and wrap and things like that, extra processing costs. Keep track of your trucking when you bring a load of animals to the processor, and then have a list of your current prices. Like I referred to before, I keep all my data on one sheet so that when I sit down to use the tool, I have everything already collected in front of me. It makes my experience a little more pleasant. If you search for Cornell Smart Marketing online, you'll find a series of marketing articles. Back in the end of 2017 and the beginning of 18, I wrote a series of 4 short articles, or about 2 pages each, that cover understanding the consumer, marketing strategy, and pricing. So if you want to read more on this subject or more on meat marketing in general, you can search Cornell Smart Marketing and find these 2-page articles and download them. Finally, I'll just share my contact information. My email address is there. If questions occur to you after the Q&A session's over, you can feel free to email me with questions about pricing. And once again, there's the web address to use the pricing tool. So with that, I'm done, and we can field some additional questions.
So before we do the questions, we're going to do our final poll questions. So if you give me 1 second, I will get them up. So the questions that we're asking are, based on what you learned, how likely are you to adjust your current pricing? Very likely, likely, not likely, or definitely not likely. The second question is, based on what you learned, do you feel confident in your ability to set prices for a new market? Are you very confident, somewhat confident, minimally confident, or not confident at all?
Well, it's great to see the way these are kind of shaking out. At least when people think about pricing for a new opportunity, they feel pretty confident about how to approach that. And the same goes for cost of production. I think if you see how you can break it up into small pieces, it makes the accounting, if you will, less daunting. And that's what we tried to do with the pricing.
All right, we'll give it just a few more seconds, and then I will turn it over to Ryan to moderate some questions. Ryan, you can go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Amanda. So first question, we did have a few come in and through the chat. And I think this refers to a situation which is pretty common. You might be running a beef cow calf herd. And so how do you factor in that cost production per head to include the feed / care costs for the cow during gestation? We're not buying feed or calves. We're retaining ownership of that animal throughout its life.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. So that's a cost of production question. And it's just what I was just saying, break it up into pieces. So if you are producing your own hay and your own feed, those are enterprises, right? You have a hay making enterprise. So look at your cost of production per bale of hay. and then think about, in essence, selling bales of hay to your cow-calf operation, because those cows are going to eat your hay. I mean, I'm just breaking this up to make it simple. And so when you start to think about, wow, how do I account for a finished steer when I've got cow-calf and I've got feed, and break things up into small enterprises and just crunch those numbers. So haymaking operation, what costs can we allocate to the haymaking operation? We've got equipment, we've got fuel, we've got time, we've got something about our land or our inputs on the land. So now if we allocate all those costs and we look at the number of bales we made, we can come out with a break-even cost of production for hay bales. Okay, now we don't want to be break-even, so we could think about, in essence, selling those hay bales out into the market. If we're going to retain them and feed them to our cows and to our steers, then we're going to sort of sell those hays to our other enterprises. Next, we've got a cow-calf enterprise where we have the cost of keeping the cows all year long, and our saleable goods are our feeders. So we're going to sell feeders to our feeding and finishing operation. So just think about the cost that we can allocate to the cow-calf, or fractions of costs, right? If you're using the same tractor for haying and for feeding the cows and for feeding the steers, then you can divide that cost up. But that's how I would approach coming at cost of production, is breaking it up into enterprises, isolating them, allocating their costs, and basically looking at their output and dividing across the number of units produced, and then in essence selling those items through the chain, just like I did with the that little diagram with the blue arrows, where we're selling feeders to a feeding and finishing operation, we're selling finished animals to a marketing operation. That's my best advice. Start somewhere like that, and then improve your system year after year.
No, good advice. Thank you. Next question. Is there a similar tool that would do the same thing for pricing poultry?
That's a great question. The answer is yes and no. There's nothing about this pricing tool that would prevent you from just tricking it. So if you're selling poultry by the piece, you can check any box you want: lamb, goat, pig, doesn't matter. And just enter the names of your chicken cuts instead of your pork cuts. Just use all the numbers the same way that you would if you were entering another species. We didn't put poultry in the tool when we made it, but there's nothing specific to those species in any of the math that would prevent you from just running poultry through in the same way.
Perfect. Next question. Does by the cut method calculate the average price per pound or for the entire carcass?
It calculates the weighted average for you, the weighted average price. So that's if you took all the pounds of the various cuts and sold them all at the various sets of prices that you have and got the total and divided up by the total pounds, that's the weighted average price. So the pricing tool will show you your weighted average price for your current pricing scenario and then your revised pricing scenario. Is that what the question was, you think?
I believe so, yes. If not, chat me back, and we can circle back to that. Next question, how much time do you realistically think I should spend on my marketing plan?
Yeah, okay, how much time? So, my tough love answer is, it depends on how much you need the farm to contribute to your income, or how important it is. So if you're going to have, let's say, a direct to consumer presence, you're going to need a marketing plan that reflects establishing brand identity. That's generic work, right? Not channel specific, but just letting people know that we're here, letting them know what we produce, and then some additional time selling in each channel that you use. So there's no simple answer for that, but I find that a plan makes it easier to do the work of marketing than when you don't have one. So I would advise people to create even a simple marketing plan that guides their decision making, and kind of dictates how much time they should be spending on marketing. But there's so many factors there, like how many head are you marketing and how much channels are you using, and so there's no quick and simple answer. But in essence, if you need your business to perform seriously, then you need to spend some time on a marketing plan.
All right, thank you. Next question, how can you apply your farm schedule to estimating your cost of production? And I'm not sure if they're referring to farm schedule for taxes or not. We might have to clarify that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know that the Schedule F, I don't do taxes, so I'm not super familiar with the Schedule F, but if it's got to do with your sort of weekly schedule, again, I'd come back to the idea of snapshot record keeping. You don't have to keep constant logs of all your activities on the farm in order to allocate those costs of time to your enterprises. But what if you took a sample week and kept a notebook in your pocket and wrote down, what activity was I doing, and which enterprise do I allocate that cost to? So I was out, feeding cattle. That's something that happens every day, right? So you could begin to build some estimates per week or per month and assign them out. And the way that I would do that, very practically speaking, is to keep a little notebook in my pocket, or if you're more oriented towards phones, keep a phone, open up a notes page and make some notes. That's the whole idea of snapshot record keeping. Pick a small period of time, keep records there, develop your system for record keeping, and then you can always work to improve it through time.
Oh, that sounds good. I think that's a real practical way of approaching it. So back to a few more marketing questions coming in. What best way to invoice customers for wholes and halves? Do I break out the processing cost?
That question has a couple layers. So for custom exempt processing, to the letter of the law, the customer should be paying the processor separately. However, I think it's a form of customer service to just keep it simple for your customer. And frankly, I guess I can't give that kind of advice, but I would invoice my customer with one price that includes the cost of processing, because I want my communication with them to be very simple, not getting into, well, there's this and there's that. That's what I usually recommend to folks. And then if you're really, you want to go by the letter of the law, you could have them still write 2 checks to you, but just present one invoice. Or at least when they're making the commitment to buy or they're inquiring to buy, just give them one price. That's a price per pound hanging weight that includes the cost of processing.
Sounds good. And I think a follow-up to that is marking again, sell by live weight or carcass weight.
If I was selling quarters, halves, and wholes, I would definitely go by carcass weight. I think it's, there's a reason the industry uses it, and carcass weight is for most people, an easier weight to get than the live weight. So I really would advise to use hanging weight.
All right, thanks. And then, Bill, you might have to help me out here. I think you were trying to help respond to one of the earlier questions, trying to differentiate between pricing on retail product or versus carcass weight basis.
Yeah, I think your tool calculates it out on a average per pound for retail products sold, not necessarily on a carcass weight basis.
Yeah, so there's on the very first page, you can elect to work on pricing for carcasses. And I didn't do that example because it's simple. It's not too hard. I think people can navigate it, but you can choose right on the first page of the pricing tool which channel you're pricing for, and then say that you're pricing by the carcass and choose your species and carry on from there. It's like I said, it's a shorter process because you don't have to enter all the names of all the cuts and all the weights. So carcass pricing is a little easier.
Right. But your example, when it showed an average, it was the average price per pound of retail products sold.
That's correct. Yeah. The weighted average across all.
Yeah,
products.
it didn't back it all the way out to the carcass base, but you could do that if you knew what your carcass average weight was and your retail product was yourself.
see.
Pretty easy.
No, thanks for clarifying that. And then just looking through the chat here, I know Gene's dropped in a couple helpful, useful links here, especially in regards to a farm program that incorporates Schedule F. In our wrap up here, we're going to show the livestock topic hub again that has some enterprise budgets and might get more into specific situations and determining costs, whether it's for cow calf or feedlot, what have you. That definitely could be customized for these situations. And other university extensions have them too if you do a little searching. But with that, if there's not last call for questions, if not, we will turn it back over to Carolyn to take us home for the night. One last question here before we pull up the closing here. Since you have to sell the animal prior to processing, how do you communicate to the customer the price for the meat?
I would use your pricing that you present to the customer as dollars per pound hanging weight, including the cost of processing. I'd work on that at home or on the pricing tool in advance. And then, from experience, when you kind of learn the range of carcass weights that you see off your farm, you can begin to estimate. So I used to have a slide in this presentation. It's a customer saying, so how much does a quarter of a beef cost, right? And the farmer says, well, there's the carcass weight, and then I pay the processor, and they kind of wander around, right? And at the end, the customer has no idea what they just said. So if I would base my pricing on dollars per pound hanging weight, including the cost of processing. But what I would answer when the customer says, hey, how much is a quarter of a beef? I'd say, well, it ranges between $650 and $700, and you're going to receive, about 90 to 100 pounds. Right? I'm going to tell them what they should expect to spend and what they should expect to receive. And my pricing, because I don't know that carcass weight yet, is still based on the carcass weight. I hope that was as clear as an unmuddied lake.
No, that's okay. And then maybe just maybe a little follow up on that. One of the things we've experienced a few years ago, there was some survey work with local processors in Wisconsin, how they priced. How do you communicate kind of the unknown that there are the special requests? If you want everything vacuum packed or some of those extras, you are going to end up paying extra.
Sure. I guess if you're going to be paying additional processing fees, it comes up a lot with pork. I would have a base price and then say there will be additional charges for smoking or for, if you want patties made. Those are electives for the customer. We don't see those value-added products come up quite as often with beef processing. So but yeah, I wouldn't be afraid to divulge them as added costs because people can choose them. But the nice thing about basing your price on the carcass weight is that person can choose to have everything closely trimmed and boneless, and the farm doesn't have to pay for those losses, right? The customer is receiving what they ordered, and they paid based on the carcass weight. That's really the rationale for carcass weight pricing, so that customer can make those choices and receive a lower yield based on their preferences, and it's not going to hurt the farm.
And then related to that, I don't know if you have experience with this or not, or someone else does. Does Cryovac sell higher than white paper wrap with direct cuts to consumer?
I would say, yeah, absolutely. If you're selling meat by the cut retail, whether it's at a farmer's market or in a freezer case in your barn, people like to see the color of the meat. They like to see the product. So Cryovac is best for retail. If you're selling freezer beef, quarters, halves, and wholes, there's nothing wrong with getting paper. It's fine. It lasts a really long time. I've never had a problem with paper wrap. Yeah, and someone's asking about the custom exempt meat processing. So I might need Gene to hop in because I don't know all of Wisconsin's rules, but in most states, you need to, if you're going to have an animal processed at a custom exempt plant where it's not USDA inspected, you need to have that animal sold before the processing date. You can document that by having the customer give you a deposit or even send you an email agreeing to buy it. But in essence, when you sell through quarters and halves, you're not selling customers meat. You're selling them an animal. And in this case, you've got 4 owners on the animal. So no one actually sells that meat. The meat will often come back in packages that are marked not for sale. That's because the owner of that animal can't sell that meat. They're receiving it for their own consumption. So it's a nice, around my region, we have a limited number of USDA inspected plants. That's necessary for any retail cut situation, right? But then we have another line of plants that are custom exempt, and anyone who's selling quarters, halves, and wholes direct to consumer can take advantage of using those plants, even if the USDA places are booked up. They can use them legally by selling the animal while it's still alive, and then you can bill your customer after the processing, but they technically own the animal when it goes to slaughter. So that's what custom exempt really means.
Oh, good. Thank you. And that's always a good thing to brush up on before you get too deep into this. And I don't know, my colleagues, I always struggle with this because we do have a mix in Wisconsin between state and federally inspected. And I think there's some regional differences. My colleagues can expand more on that. But if you're close to a state line like I am, you do get more interest in that because there's obviously the lure of, well, then I can sell across state lines as well. So yeah, there's a comment in the chat. In Wisconsin, Department of Ag rules apply. Need to understand the regs that apply to your situation. That's always good to double check.
So thank you for joining us tonight, whether you were joining us live or you watch us at a later date and time. This is our last installment of our special beef edition for Wisconsin. Thank you for joining us, and please fill out our evaluation surveys that Sandy will be sending out later this week or the next week. That will help us determine what kind of educational opportunities you guys would like in the future. And please visit us at livestock.extension.wis.edu. Here is our contact information if you would like to contact any one of us tonight on tonight's presentation, or feel free to contact your local extension agent. And this evening's session was recorded and will be shared with you via email at a later date. Here is our topic website. And we've been discussing different types of tools to help you manage your operations, and you can find those here at the decision tools and software section. And thank you and have a great night.